When Thomas stepped into the sleek corporate lobby with a cup of coffee in hand, no one expected him to be anything but a driver. But what he overheard in those glossy halls would save his entire company from a disaster that could have cost 100 million Sotsun and change his life forever. The morning sun spilled golden light over the city skyline, casting long shadows on the glass towers where deals were made and fortunes won or lost. Inside one of those towers, the air buzzed with anticipation. Another big deal was about to be signed, one that would send ripples through the business world. Yet, few in that building suspected the fate of their future rested not with a boardroom executive or a star analyst, but with a man few paid attention to. Thomas Reed adjusted the collar of his modest jacket and pushed through the revolving doors of the corporate headquarters. His steps were steady but measured, carrying the quiet confidence of a man who knew his place, but refused to be invisible. A cup of steaming latte in his hand, the scent of roasted coffee beans mingled with the sterile corporate air. As he approached the reception desk, a sharp glance met him. "This coffee shop is for clients only, not for drivers," a receptionist muttered, barely disguising her disdain. Her eyes swept over his dark skin and simple attire, and the judgment was clear. A black man with a cup of coffee in a lobby full of executives was a contradiction. Thomas didn't flinch. His voice was calm, deliberate. "Is Mr. Mason here?" The woman scoffed, a half-laugh shared with a colleague. "Oh, he's upstairs, busy with important things. Doubt he needs coffee brought by you." They didn't even try to hide their assumptions. To them, Thomas was a shadow, a background figure to be ignored, a driver whose role was to serve, not to exist on equal footing. But Thomas wasn't here just to grab coffee. He was here because he belonged. He just hadn't been acknowledged yet. In the elevator, a different voice, cold and clipped, interrupted his thoughts. "Next time, get your visit approved at the front desk." Thomas met the man's gaze squarely, unafraid and unyielding. "I'm not a visitor," he said quietly. "I'm part of this company. You just don't know it yet." The man's eyes narrowed, but Thomas said no more. He stepped off the elevator and made his way to the floor where the real decisions were made. To everyone else, Thomas Reed was the driver. The man who waited outside, the one who handled errands, the black face in the background. But Thomas had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving. Years of experience had taught him that real power didn't always come with a flashy title or an office with a view. Today, Thomas was on a mission. Earlier that morning, as he waited in his car near the cafe, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Employees from the legal department were casually discussing a critical contract involving Rytech Systems, a major deal set to be signed the next day by his boss, Garrett Mason. But something was wrong. "Damon never even checked the patents," one voice said. "This deal's built on a fake patent. If we sign tomorrow, we're toast. They're walking away with everything." Thomas's heart pounded as he quickly recorded snippets of the conversation on his phone. Every second could cost the company millions. He knew the stakes, and he knew Garrett Mason had to hear this now. When he finally found Garrett in his office, the man barely looked up at him. "Thomas, are you giving me a ride home? Or is the strategy changing?" Garrett asked, a tired impatience in his voice. Thomas swallowed the urge to respond with the full truth. Instead, he held up his phone and hit play. The voices from the cafe spilled out into the room, confidential, damning, and impossible to ignore. Garrett's face shifted. Skepticism gave way to shock, and then a slow, heavy sigh. "If this is true," Garrett murmured, voice barely above a whisper. "You've just saved this company from a disaster bigger than any I've seen in my career." Thomas nodded, but his mind raced. The board, the investors, the employees, all depended on that deal. The truth was a weapon, but only if wielded correctly. That evening, word spread quietly through the company's corridors. By morning, the atmosphere had changed. Thomas arrived at the lobby the next day with no expectation, just doing his usual routine. But this time, as he approached the front desk, the receptionist smiled, a little differently. "Mr. Reed," she said carefully, "Mr. Mason asked me to tell you to come to the conference room. It's urgent." Thomas's breath caught. He followed the instructions and entered a room where every executive, lawyer, and analyst sat at the long, polished table, their faces a mix of surprise and respect. Garrett stood at the head of the table, clearing his throat. "Yesterday, a man many of you overlooked saved us all from ruin," Garrett said, his voice steady. "Thomas Reed." A silence fell. Then, one by one, people stood. Hands were extended. Apologies were whispered. "We didn't know," someone said, eyes downcast. Thomas just nodded. He didn't need to hear it. He wasn't seeking vindication or revenge. He wanted one thing: for his truth to be heard. In that moment, it wasn't about coffee or the elevator rules or the assumptions of the few. It was about the undeniable fact that sometimes the quietest voices hold the loudest power, and the courage to speak up can change everything. The office was a world apart from the bustling cafe where Thomas had overheard the conversation. Glass walls separated floors, and the muted hum of voices carried a constant sense of urgency. In the corner office overlooking the city skyline, Garrett Mason sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his fingers drumming impatiently on the polished surface. The deal with Rytech Systems was supposed to be the crown jewel of the year, a strategic partnership that would boost the company's valuation, open doors to new technologies, and impress the board and investors alike. Garrett had spent months negotiating terms, reviewing documents, and preparing for the final signing tomorrow. Yet nothing had prepared him for the unexpected knock on his door. It was Thomas Reed, the driver, someone Garrett rarely saw beyond the occasional greeting in the parking lot. "Mr. Mason?" Thomas said, his voice steady but carrying an urgency Garrett rarely heard from him. "Can I have 5 minutes?" Garrett frowned, motioning him inside. "What is it, Thomas? I'm in the middle of—" "I need to tell you something I overheard this morning," Thomas interrupted, pulling out his phone from the pocket of his jacket. His hand trembled slightly as he pressed play. The quiet voice from the recording spilled into the room. Confidential snippets of conversation from the legal and product teams. Words like patent fraud, Damon didn't verify, and deal falls apart echoed through the speakers. Garrett's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, his breath hitching slightly as the realization sunk in. The voice on the recording was clear enough. This wasn't just a rumor. The patent behind Rytech's technology was questionable. If true, the entire deal could be worthless or worse, expose the company to legal and financial disaster. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the city below. Then Garrett's voice broke the quiet, low and grim. "Where did you get this?" "In the cafe by accident," Thomas admitted. "I was getting coffee, and they were talking too loud. I thought it was nothing at first, but then I realized what they said." Garrett stared at the phone, then looked up, his gaze locking onto Thomas. Why didn't you come to me sooner?" Thomas met his eyes. "I was just the driver. I wasn't sure if it was my place, but this could ruin everything." Garrett let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. You did the right thing, Thomas. This could have gone unnoticed and cost us everything. The silence returned, heavy with unspoken questions. Garrett's mind raced through possibilities. Had Damon truly overlooked a critical patent? Was this an internal cover-up, or worse, a betrayal? He pushed his chair back and stood, determination settling over him like armor. Get me legal. I want every document re-examined, every claim verified. Thomas, I want you to stay close. If you hear or see anything else, I want to know immediately. Thomas nodded, relief flooding his face. I will, sir. In the following hours, the usually polished and confident Garrett was a man transformed. The casual arrogance he wore like a shield cracked under the weight of uncertainty. Calls were made, emails fired off, meetings scheduled. Thomas stayed on the sidelines, a silent sentinel, aware now that his actions had thrust him into a world where every second counted. His status as just a driver faded, replaced by a cautious respect from those who began to see him as more than a shadow. Late that afternoon, the conference room was filled with the company's top brass, lawyers, analysts, and key decision-makers. Garrett stood at the front, his voice cutting through the tension. We've encountered a serious issue with the Rytech Systems deal, he began. There are allegations that the patent in question may be invalid. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces turned pale. Others exchanged worried glances. I want full transparency, Garrett continued. No stone unturned. If we move forward without fixing this, we're looking at catastrophic losses. Potentially hundreds of millions. One of the senior lawyers cleared her throat, her tone grave. We've already begun a full audit of the patent and supporting documents. Initial findings suggest discrepancies, but we need more time. Garrett nodded sharply. Then delay the signing. Postpone everything until we have clarity. Another executive frowned. But the board expects this to close tomorrow. Delaying could damage our reputation and stock price. Garrett's jaw tightened. Better to delay and survive than to rush and lose everything. The room fell silent as the weight of the decision sank in. That evening, Garrett sat alone in his office, the city lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He replayed Thomas's recording over and over, the voices of Damon and the legal team haunting him. How had this happened? Damon was one of his most trusted partners, a senior analyst with a sterling reputation. To think that such a critical oversight had slipped past was unsettling, but to suspect intentional deception was far worse. His phone buzzed, a text from Thomas. If I hear anything else, I'll let you know immediately. Garrett smiled faintly. For once, he was grateful that the man he once thought of as just a driver had ears sharp enough to catch what others missed. The next morning, Thomas was already at the building before most had arrived. The usual buzz of the lobby felt different, charged with anticipation and whispered rumors. Employees who barely glanced at him the day before now offered nods or polite greetings. Thomas made his way to the elevator and pushed the button. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside. At the reception desk, a young woman looked up with surprise. Mr. Reed, she said carefully. Mr. Mason has been asking for you. Thomas nodded and followed directions to the 20th floor. When he entered the conference room, the atmosphere was unlike anything he had ever seen in the building. The entire executive team, legal counsel, and analysts sat in stiff silence, their eyes fixed on Garrett. Garrett stood, his posture straighter than usual. Thomas, he said, his voice clear and steady, I want you to know that yesterday you saved this company. Not an analyst, not a lawyer, but our driver, our team member. You could have stayed silent. You didn't. applause broke out from the room. Some faces that had once been cold and dismissive now held genuine respect. Hands reached out, shaking Thomas's in welcome. One executive spoke quietly. "We owe you an apology, Thomas. We judged you unfairly." Thomas met their eyes, his voice calm but resolute. "I'm not here for apologies," he said simply. "I'm here to do my job and to make sure we all do what's right." From that day forward, Thomas's role changed. He was no longer invisible. His insight and courage earned him a seat at meetings and a voice in decisions. Garrett made sure of it. The Rytech Systems deal was put on hold. A full investigation was launched, uncovering layers of negligence and some deliberate misinformation. Thanks to Thomas's bravery, the company avoided a catastrophic mistake that could have bankrupted the firm and shattered its reputation. And all because a driver stepped into a cafe, listened closely, and chose to speak up. The morning light poured into the building, reflecting off the glass walls and marble floors of the corporate headquarters. The air felt different now, charged with a new energy. News of the potential catastrophe averted had spread quietly but swiftly through the ranks. Employees whispered in corners, eyes flickering toward Thomas Reed as he moved through the hallways. Gone was the cold dismissal that had marked his daily routine. Instead, nods of recognition and tentative smiles followed him. It was a subtle but profound shift, one that Thomas had never expected, but quietly welcomed. As he approached the front desk, the receptionist greeted him with an unfamiliar warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Reed," she said, her tone sincere. Thomas returned the greeting with a nod. "Good morning." This simple exchange was a stark contrast to the usual curt responses he received before. It was proof that sometimes respect wasn't demanded but earned, quietly, patiently, and often against the odds. Garrett Mason was already waiting for him in the conference room. The team had gathered early, their expressions a mix of relief, gratitude, and contemplation. "Thomas," Garrett began, his voice carrying a new respect, "I want to officially thank you. Yesterday, you didn't just save a deal. You saved jobs, livelihoods, and the future of this company." Thomas shook his head, a modest smile on his lips. "I just listened," he said simply. "Sometimes, that's all it takes." Garrett smiled. "Sometimes, that's more than enough." The door opened, and one by one, faces that had been indifferent or hostile the day before entered. Those who had doubted or dismissed Thomas now approached him with hesitant hands extended. "I owe you an apology," said the head of legal, her eyes sincere. "We were wrong to overlook you." Another executive nodded. "We didn't see you, but today, we do." Thomas met each apology with grace, understanding that change was never instant. It was built one moment at a time, through actions and acknowledgement. Word spread quickly, and by noon, the company's atmosphere had shifted. The once unseen driver had become a symbol of integrity and courage. In the break room, colleagues who had barely exchanged a word with Thomas now sought him out, eager to hear his thoughts, to thank him for speaking up. "Honestly," one analyst said quietly, "if you hadn't listened, we'd be facing bankruptcy." Thomas shrugged. "I was just doing what anyone should do." But everyone knew it was more than that. That afternoon, Garrett called an all-hands meeting. The conference room buzzed as employees found their seats. Garrett stood at the front, calm and collected. "I want to address what happened with the Rytech Systems deal," he began. "Thanks to Thomas, we uncovered a serious flaw in the patent claims. We're delaying the signing and conducting a full review." A murmur of approval spread. "But more importantly," Garrett continued, This incident has reminded us all of the value of every member of our team, no matter their title or role. It is a lesson in humility and respect. He paused, then looked directly at Thomas. Thomas Reed, you showed us all what courage looks like. You reminded us that truth and integrity are our greatest assets. The room erupted in applause. Thomas felt a surge of pride, but also a deep sense of responsibility. The days that followed were filled with changes, both practical and cultural. The board approved new protocols to ensure transparency and encourage employees to speak up without fear. Thomas was invited to participate in strategy sessions, his insights valued and respected. His relationship with Garrett deepened into one of mutual trust and respect. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights twinkled below, Garrett found Thomas near the window, gazing out. "You changed this place," Garrett said softly. Thomas turned, surprised. "I just did what was right," Thomas replied. Garrett shook his head. "It takes more than right to stand up. It takes courage, something many don't have." Thomas smiled. "Maybe it's something we all have inside." The Rytech Systems deal was eventually restructured with due diligence, safeguarding the company's interests. And while the journey was far from over, the foundation had been laid for a stronger, more inclusive culture. Thomas Reed, once just a driver, had become a catalyst for change, a reminder that heroes often come from the most unexpected places.